Having now completed my first year of VCE, I've realized that I've gone through a lot in this last year or so.
Emergency.
Yep, this is the unpleasant noise that surprised me in my very first 3-4 sack. In that time, I've learnt a lot of things that I wish I knew before I started E11. And that's exactly why I'm making this video, to try share some of those tips and lessons with you guys now, to try help you in your journeys in your last few years of high school, or university, or in general life. So yeah, let's get started. The first tip I have for you guys is don't get too far ahead of yourselves. If you're one of those people that want to stay ahead of class or study the content before you come across that content at school, it's completely fine to do so, but don't get carried away. Last year, the summer before I went into my first year of VCE, I got carried away. I spent anywhere from 6 to 8 hours studying for my 2-3-4s, further math and accounting, except for a few days when we went on holidays with family. And guess what? 4 weeks into the school year, I ended up forgetting everything that I spent that whole summer doing, and I basically had to relearn everything we did at school anyway. So staying ahead of class is good, but don't get too far ahead of class, because chances are, literally most likely like 95% chance that you're just going to forget that information and have to cover it anyway. So I don't recommend getting too far ahead of your class at school. Having covered all that content ahead of time didn't really give me advantage over my peers, because by the time that content actually came up at school, firstly, I had forgotten that content, so I had to study it anyway. But secondly, the fact that I could recognize the content in class because I had come across it maybe like a few months before, wasn't really an advantage, because my friends who did not spend that summer covering that content had also pre-studied that content only a few weeks prior. So when I rocked up to class, my friends had seen that content a few weeks ago, whereas I had seen that content like a few months ago because I covered that content so far in advance. So yeah, I don't recommend doing that. Instead of covering the content months and months ahead, what I would recommend is covering the content and staying maybe a few weeks ahead of class, but more importantly, doing your pre-study every weekend. So what that basically means is every weekend I'll usually sit down, and I wouldn't just read all the PowerPoints that I'm going to cover at school in the next week, because that's very inefficient. I would basically have a skim over some of the content I'm going to be learning in that next week and start learning some of that content ahead of class. I wouldn't really go and try and get a mastery of that content ahead of class, because that's kind of what I'm going to do at school, right? But I would get enough of an idea so that when that content is introduced in class, I'm not recognizing it for the first time, and rather than reacting to the content, I'm actually trying to learn the content. Now, when you see the content for the very first time in class and you haven't pre-studied it, a lot of the times, me personally, I'm not really trying to understand the content. More so, I'm basically subconsciously reacting to the content, right? Is this hard? Is this not hard? What the hell is this big ass word I come across? I'm not really thinking in terms of trying to learn that content. I'm more over reacting to that content. So when you pre-study, you can get that reaction of the content out the way at home. So when you go to class, you've already seen that content before. So rather than reacting to that content, you're actually trying to learn that content. And when a lot of the times when you react to the content in class and ask your teacher questions on the content, those questions are very, surface level questions. Whereas if you've already reacted to the content at home, in your pre-study, and you go to class and that's the second or third time you're coming across the content and you have some sort of prior knowledge, the questions you're going to ask your teacher that you don't understand about that content are going to be much more high yield, if that makes any sense. But anyway, to sum it up, don't study too far ahead of your curriculum or your content or your study design, because most of the time you're going to end up forgetting it and having to relearn it. So still stay ahead, but don't do anything crazy like I did. Second lesson I learned was always prepare for tests and SACs way earlier than you think you should start preparing for them. A really big mindset switch that really helped me along the whole year was the fact that don't look at your tests as being a certain amount of weeks or days away, rather look at your tests as being a certain amount of weekends away. Now, I'll quickly explain what I mean by that. So for example, if you have a biology SAC 3 weeks away, instead of thinking of that SAC as I have 21 days to study for that SAC, think of that SAC as I have 3 weekends till that SAC. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because when you start VCE, it's super hectic. Most of the weekdays just fly by. You go to school, you study, you come home, you consolidate that content. And a lot of the time you're going to spend time just doing homework and assignments and stuff that won't really contribute towards your end grade. So don't look at, SACs as don't look at weekdays. I personally didn't look at weekdays as having time to properly study for a SAC. So when you start treating a SAC in that mindset, which I told you guys about, whereas if I would have a method SAC in 2 weeks time, whereas a friend of mine may be thinking that they have 2 weeks to study for that SAC, and because of that, they're very complacent and a bit lazy, and basically neglecting studying for that SAC. I will think of it as I only have 2 weekends away before I have to, do that SAC. And that just creates a sense of urgency. Also, you never want to leave your SAC study, or you never want to leave your SAC preparation the weekend before a SAC. And that's simply because you're going to have 4 to 5 subjects. And if you think you can literally sacrifice a whole weekend only studying for a subject, then you probably won't be able to do that. I mean, you could, but that means you're going to be neglecting your other subjects. And then if you play that type of game in VCE where you're just like, oh, okay, I have a biology SAC this weekend, so all I'm studying this week, all I'm studying is bio, and I'm going to get behind on my other 4 subjects and catch up on them when I have their SACs. You're just going to play catch up all year round. And by the time exams come, you're not going to have a sufficient mastery of the content because you basically crammed the whole year. You didn't really spend time actually learning and understanding the information because you were always studying the weekend before a SAC. A major tip I have when it comes to SACs and stuff is when the teacher gives you a date for your SAC, firstly, obviously, put it on your calendar. If you don't use a calendar in VCE, then use one. But whenever a teacher gives you a test date or a SAC date, first thing you want to do is obviously go on your calendar and go on that day and label it as SAC day so you can flag that day so it doesn't catch you off guard. But more importantly, what you should do is whatever date they have given you, go back 3 days and make another event on that day and say, for example, if you have a biology SAC on the 21st of January, you want to go to 21st of January, make an event, say biology SAC, then you want to go 3 days in advance, which would be the 28th of January. No. Yeah. It would be the 28th of, No, it'd be the 18th of January. You want to go 3 days before that due date and make another event, and you want to label this event as biology test SAC ready. That's the day that you want to pretend is your biology SAC and aim to be SAC ready by. Now what that does is it basically gives you a 3 days margin of error in case something goes wrong or there's a certain content that takes you harder to learn, or if you've missed something in your study that you realize right up at the end that you've missed, it gives you that margin of error to be ready for your SAC by the time it comes around. A lot of the times last year I received SAC results and stuff, and I dropped a few marks that I knew that if I had 1 or 2 more extra days to be able to study that content, I would have tweaked those little things, those little conceptual understandings that I didn't quite have, but I knew I was almost there, right? But I didn't have the time for. Well, guess what? You have the time for that stuff. So whenever you think you want to study for a SAC, for me it was especially accounting, and I didn't do this for the first SAC, is always start studying for that SAC a few days early. Because by the time the SAC day comes, you're going to wish you had 2 more days, and you're going to know that if you had 2 more days, you would have improved your SAC result by a few marks, which in VC can be a lot depending on the subject. You have those 2 days ahead of time, if only you start studying for the SAC 2 days earlier. So yeah, start studying for your SACs earlier than you possibly think you need to. Third tip I have for you guys is don't be afraid to ask for help. Teachers are way more helpful than you may think they are, so make sure you make good use of them. In my experience, even if there's a teacher that doesn't particularly like you, but you go out of your own way to see them, outside of class, whether that be start of the school day, end of the school day, recess, lunch, literally 10 times out of 10, because it's never happened to me, they're going to go that extra step for you, they're going to put in the extra effort for you to try help you out, to make sure you understand whatever you're having a misconception about and get better results than you would have if you didn't ask them for help. It's like when you ask someone for help, right? Or if someone asks you for help. I personally love getting asked for help because it makes me feel valuable, and I get to help people out, and it's just a great feeling, right? They're teachers and that's their whole job. Don't be afraid to ask teachers for help. Most of the time they love being asked for help, and they're going to go above and beyond to help you out, so make sure you make use of that reason. A thing that helped me out massively last year was that I had really good relationships with 2 to 3 teachers, whereas if I ever had a question, I would email it to them and I would receive a response within 12 to 24 hours. So it was like having a private tutor without having to pay for one. But it was epic. So try to make those relationships with those teachers that, again, will help you out throughout the year. Another thing, don't be afraid to ask older year levels for help. If you're in year 11, reach out to year 12s, and if you're in year 12, find some, people who graduated from your school and, ask them for help. I think this is the most underrated thing in VCE, is, me personally, I was always intimidated by older year levels, and now that I'm in year 12, there is no older year level. But the fact that as I'm making this video, I've gone through the year 11 experience, I've made those mistakes, I've learned those lessons, right? So if now there's a year 11, if there's 2 year 11s and one of them comes and asks me for help, which I'm willing to help out, yeah, I'm going to share my experiences, my lessons, my mistakes with that year 11, who now doesn't have to make those mistakes that I did to learn the lessons that they did. For example, the first SAC of the year. As a year 12, I know 90% of E11s stuff up their first sack of the year because they don't realize the jump from year 10 to year 11 or year 10 to year 12 if you're doing a 3-4 subject, right? But me having told that to someone and them taking that advice seriously and preparing for that first sack puts them at such a big advantage that they wouldn't have. Another personal anecdote I have is the very first sack of the year for accounting, I did really, really bad. Really bad in the sense that out of 40 marks, I got 33 and the average was like 32. Like I was 1 mark above average, which was trash. In that time between my first 3-4 sack for accounting and my first set of sacks for further maths, I reached out to this person, this year 12, and I asked them for advice. I was like, I'm struggling with exam taking techniques. Obviously, you've done a whole year of VCE, you've sat a bunch of 3-4 sacks, you've got a 50 in bio. How'd you do that? And they gave me a step-by-step process, which I followed, and guess what? I replicated the results. Now, obviously, all the credit isn't due to them. It obviously comes down to me, or obviously having studied that content. But me reaching out to year 12s definitely helps me out a lot. So yeah, make sure you reach out to older year levels. They will help you out a lot. I know it can be very intimidating reaching out to older year levels, but 99.9% of the time you're going to find out that everyone's really nice and wants to help out anyway. But yeah, the fact that it's intimidating is the reason that most people don't reach out to older year levels to ask for help. So the ones who do have an advantage. So yeah, take that advantage. Next tip is something that I was really bad at doing or really bad at not doing, is don't focus on the end goal. What I basically mean by this is don't think too far ahead of yourself. So for example, when you have a sack coming up a subject, don't think of it as, oh, I have to get 100% on this sack to get a 50. You know, if you're at the start of the year or even towards the end of the year, don't really look at each sack and each test as something that's contributing to your ATAR. And, you know, that whole notion of I want to get a certain study score or a certain ATAR, take that out of your head because it doesn't really help. It gets very overwhelming. VCE as a curriculum and life in general is a very big marathon. And the only way you get through it is by looking at the next test, just focusing on the thing in front of you and doing the best you can at that thing and then moving on. Not focusing on the end goal is great, but goals in general are not a bad thing. I remember this quote from motivation is a myth. You should always think of your goal, set a goal, but then forget it. And that's what I did last year as well. I had a goal at the start of the year for, my subjects, both of my subjects, which was to get a 40 in both of my subjects. I set that goal, but then as the year went on, over that first term and a half I had that goal in my mind every single time I went to class. And that was just a super stressful experience. And if anything, it made doing well in the subject even harder. By the middle of the year and definitely towards the end of the year before exams, that goal wasn't really in my head. I was more looking at, okay, this next exam, this next sack, I just want to do the best I can in it. And then whatever result we get at the end of the year, it is what it is, right? So set a goal, but then forget about it and then just focus on the thing ahead of you. I was really bad at it, so don't be bad at it like me. And yeah, you're just going to have a much less stressful experience throughout VC if you don't constantly think of your end goal. Focus on the process. VC is a marathon just like life. Instead of focusing on completing the marathon and getting a certain ATAR, just focus on the next test, running the next mile, and slowly it'll all add up and you'll get there. Next lesson I learned was embrace your mistakes. Now most people would say making a mistake is bad. I personally think making the same mistake twice is bad. And you have to, again, this is a mindset change that the sooner you implement this mindset change, the more it's going to help you out through your VC journey, which is to look at every mistake as an opportunity to learn. Every single mistake I made for the first term or so last year, I looked at it dreadfully. I was like, how the hell am I getting this wrong? Why am I so stupid? All this negativity, right? After having done that and come across this mindset change, until the day of your exam, every single mistake you make is a good thing. Because the whole point of you making that mistake is because you're not perfect, right? And you're driving towards perfection. And literally nobody starts anything perfect. So every single mistake you make is a mistake that if you fix, you're not going to make on the day that it matters, which is your exam day, right? Just this mindset change of not looking at mistakes as a bad thing is a huge mindset shift that it will definitely help you out in your VCE journey. To sum it up, learn from your mistakes. Theoretically speaking, every time you make a mistake, you really want to dissect the exact reasoning behind as to why you made that mistake in the first place. And if you do it correctly, you should not be making the same mistake twice. And that's probably the only way you're going to get that 100% at the end of the year, is if you come across these mistakes throughout the year and fix every single mistake as you come across it, so you're not making them repeatedly. Next and final tip I have for you guys is, again, a super basic one, which is focus in class. I know it's super basic, but I honestly don't think there are many people, at least at my high school, that actually make use of their in-class time. Again, this was something that I didn't do for the first term or so, but from the day that I decided that I was going to start paying attention in class, like my whole VCE was just like, I got a huge boost in terms of my progress, in terms of literally everything, right? When you go to class, sit next to your friends, that's cool, but please hold each other accountable and actually make use of that class time. Because guess what? If you make use of that class time, you're going to end up doing less homework, have a higher understanding of the content, and your teacher's respect, and save a lot of time down the line. I might make a whole video on focusing in class and what you should be doing exactly in class, or what I recommend you should be doing in class. But in general, please pay attention to your teachers. Every single question you may have, even like, not even every single question, any single like tingling of a question you may have, try to think of that, try to compose that tingling feeling of you not understanding something into a question and ask your teacher, make use of your class time, and it's going to help you do drastically better at VCE. But yeah, make use of your class time. This again relates to the fact that at the end of the day, your teachers are going to be marking your sacks and stuff. Obviously, you want to ask your teachers for help because they're going to be one marking your sacks, right? So if you don't understand something, all you have to do is get your teacher's understanding, because that's the understanding that they're going to use to mark your sacks. But more importantly, if you pay attention in class, your teacher's going to like you. Yeah, because it's respectful to pay attention in class. It's not necessarily being a teacher's pet, or all these cool kids are like, oh, don't be a teacher's pet. It's funnily enough, I've noticed that a lot of cool kids at my school that were really cool and disrespecting teachers have now realized that in year 12 they have to do well at school to do the uni course they want to do, and now they're teachers' pets. So don't be afraid of being a teacher's pet, just focus in class. That was some of the lessons that I've learned over this past year after having made all those mistakes. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. If you guys want to reach out to me, you can DM me on my Instagram, which is hopefully on the screen somewhere now. But yeah, that was all for today, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.